Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to, well, this is our first expanded Tea Talk, Eleanor William Hooker Tea Talk from the Seacoast into Manchester. We were recently asked by the New Hampshire Humanities Council to do these dialogues that we have across the state, and we chose Manchester as our first one. And the first topic is on being Muslim in the Deep North. This program is brought to you, just announcement, the New Hampshire Humanities Council, which is an independent nonprofit. Its work is statewide, but it's not a state agency. New Hampshire Humanities grants and programs support local organizations like this one. Each year, New Hampshire Humanities has sponsored more than 650 educational and cultural programs each year all over the state. And you can find out more information on the New Hampshire Humanities Council by visiting www.nhhumanities.org. We are indeed honored to be sponsored by the New Hampshire Humanities Council. In our country right now, there's a lot of opening space for us to have dialogue and to understand each other better. So I'm really happy to have our panelists here with us. And so just a brief introduction to our panelists before I pass it over to our moderator, who is Kayla Page. She's the Director for Diversity Programs at Southern New Hampshire University, a longtime New Englander. She came to SNU over 14 years ago with experience in the field of social work in a variety of settings, including public education and family service. I'm not sure if Robert Azzi needs any introduction. He's a photojournalist, a columnist, a public speaker, and an educational consultant. He's an Arab-American Muslim who writes about identity issues, conflict, and on Islam. Rashida Mohammed, another Manchester well-known person that many of you may know, she's everywhere, is a victim. She's a victim advocate for the Manchester Police Domestic and Sexual Violence Unit at the Manchester Police Department. And Kafisha Ibrahim is a junior's honors student at Southern New Hampshire University. She serves as the Vice President of Multicultural Students Union and Director at Large for the Human Resource Student Association Club. Now I'll just pass the mic over to our moderator.
I'm a bit informal by nature, so if it's okay, I'm going to sit down here, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me well over the course of the session. Honored to have you here today, and we're glad you all made it. Hopefully you found parking and will be able to find your car when you get ready to go. I don't think I have any other introductions other than to ask the panelists to begin really just with some information about yourselves, maybe something about your journey or your profession or an aspiration that you have, but just a general, easy warm-up question. Give us some context. Who are you? No rules. Go ahead. And use the microphone, please, for both for the audio of the participants and the camera.
There you go. Yep.
On. I'm Robert Azzi. I actually grew up in Manchester. I was born here. And my faith journey actually began on Chestnut Street, on Hanover Street at the First Congregational Church. And it moved to Blessed Sacrament Church down at the end of South Elm Street. And then it ended up in Lebanon and Saudi Arabia, where I completed my faith journey and became a Muslim a long time ago, much longer than I care to think about sometimes. And I haven't looked back since. It's a journey of discovery, both of my own personal faith, but the kind of journeys that people have historically made to find both faith and new opportunities and new homes around the world, and mixing and blending ourselves in new communities. So I'm here to continue that blend and that mix.
Hello, my name is Kafisa Ibrahim, and I am Somalian Kenyan. I came to the United States when I was 6 years old. I came July of 2004. I came straight to Manchester, so I grew up here. My family, I am the oldest out of 4 children. My mother is a single mother, and I am a junior here at Southern New Hampshire University. Some of my hobbies include cooking, dancing, and doing anything that I'm passionate about.
I'm Rashida Mohammed. I'm originally from Sudan, and I came to United States. So I'm 50. I came when I was 32. I was like, I started my job here in the United States with the New Hampshire Institute of Manchester. I worked with the refugees, our resettlement caseworker, and then volunteered for the YWCA Crisis Service, and then worked with them for 7 years. And for the last 10 years, I have been with Manchester Police Department. And it's very interesting to work inside Manchester Police Department with the police officers on an issue of domestic violence and sexual assault. My start about thinking about religion and Islam in particular when I was very young in Sudan, and by the rules of the women has to cover their hair, and the questions about many rules of the Islams and the religion in general, and the teaching of it, and that's created more issues to be a Muslim and to be wanted to practice without the restrictions that I personally have a conflict with. Added to it, coming to the United States, has the last name Muhammad, working in the Manchester Police Department, had kind of, to some people, some authority, but not, and we'll talk about that when we start the questions.
My next question, thank you for your responses, is can you dive a little deeper into your journey into the Muslim faith? Where did you begin? What was your exploration like? What were some pieces that were particularly important for you in your journey?
So for me, I'm born Muslim. It's not a choice when you are in a Muslim country, in a Muslim community. You born to it by your parents, and then that's the practice, and that's what you will follow. Leading out of that will be a problem, and even questioning that. So I don't think I have a journey to be a Muslim, but I have it to practice the Islam with the respect of me as a woman, as a female, as a sister, you know, as a daughter, as a wife, as a mother. So that's, I think, the journey for me more than getting to be a Muslim.
I totally agree with Rashida. I didn't have a choice. I was born into it. Both of my parents are Muslims. All of their relatives are Muslims. So at a young age, I was told to practice the faith and brought into, at like 9 years old, practicing Ramadan. I had to I was able to drink, but I couldn't eat. But as I got older, it was just my way of life. I didn't really have a choice, and I never really questioned it or try to look into other religions. My journey, when I was younger, I used to wear my hijab all the time. And in middle school, I was having like a crisis. I wanted to explore, I think, the American culture a lot more, and I kind of wanted to fit in because I remember being younger, growing up in New Hampshire in a predominantly white area. It was difficult. I was made fun of. I was given a hard time by other students. And I dealt with like a lot of Islamophobic issues, both from my own people and also other people, so it was like really difficult for me. And I remember in middle school in 6th grade, I chose to stop wearing it, and it was like really difficult for my mother to cope with it because she didn't really understand why I wanted to stop wearing my hijab because it's such a big part of our culture and her culture. She never stopped wearing it, and I had to explain to her, like, I just didn't feel like I fit in both communities. It was really tough for me. I wasn't accepted by other Muslims, and I wasn't accepted by Americans either. So it was a difficult spot to be in, and I just wanted to find myself. I wanted to start dressing the way I wanted to dress for myself. So it was just a lot of spiritual journey and finding myself.
I think that's a wonderful story. Actually, I'm going to digress a minute from myself. There's a scholar in the West Coast named Khalid Abou El Fadl, and particularly after 9/11, but certainly after the recent rise of Islamophobia, he talked about hijab, which was, if you consider that hijab is designed to sort of make somebody almost invisible to the community, then in America, you would not wear the hijab in order to become invisible, but because by wearing the hijab, you're bringing attention to yourself that is, you know, paradoxical to what the intent of hijab is. So to be really muhajjaba in America would mean not to wear the scarf and not to wear some sort of clothing that is all-encompassing. So I think it fits perfectly. For me, the journey has been, once I accepted Islam, and it was easy in the Middle East, and certainly at the time when I accepted Islam in the 1970s, it was before the attempted coup in Saudi Arabia, the coup in Iran, the coup in Afghanistan, the coup in Pakistan, before the whole area was in turmoil, and it was almost a different kind of Islam. What I find myself living with here now is I'm finding a journey of discovering an Islam that challenges the traditional patriarchy that a lot of Muslims have been forced to grow with, that they have been so desperate to define one Islam when in fact that there are many Islams, and there are Islams that are dependent on geography and history and tradition and culture and time, that through my work, and I find that sort of part of my mission is simply to challenge this sort of, and everybody has it, it's not just Islam, but in Judaism and Christianity and whatever, there's this sort of god-awful patriarchy that has sort of grown over the centuries of telling not just women, but everybody what to do and how they should do it in their own interpretations. So I think this is a really interesting time, especially in America, to be Muslim, because in America we can be Muslim in a more freer way than we can in almost, certainly in any Muslim majority country, and in almost any other Muslim country in the world. We can make our choices and not have the sort of weight of, at least Muslim governments on us. I don't know, we have, be fearful of other things coming down upon us, I guess, but certainly not from a religious aspect. So that's my journey. Is part of the journey is to challenge the orthodoxy.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up?
However, you have repeats and they have. So yeah, so he's a manly big one, but mine is just tiny one. And I think it's for me it's part of home. But I have a friend that he says that he's worried about me, that I'm not practicing as I should. And when I went to Sudan, he gave it to me, and you know, and I said, okay, I will keep it, and it's a form of prayer with it. Usually, by the religion, you do it after each of the 5 prayers, but then you can do it continuously to bring peace to yourself, and I don't mind it. But when I saw yours, I thought, we share we share something. But to say to be a Muslim in New Hampshire and to talk about my experience, and especially to talk about my experience being working at the police department, and working at the police department as a first ever black person to be working in the Manchester Police Department, and to be a female, and to be a Muslim, and to be an immigrant, and then to add to it, to work for domestic violence and sexual assault. So it's really a positions that I much enjoyed, but there is a lot of challenge to it. And the challenge sometimes even come from the victims that I serve and that I help, or the community that I wanted to be part of it, or I'm a part of it. But some people, first when I started it, and they would call and ask, if I called and I leave a message, hey, Rashida Muhammad from Manchester Police Department, and they would call like, do you have a Muhammad working at the police department now? And they're like, yeah, we do. The other thing is, and I was talking to one of my friends, detective at the PD the other day, and they said, I wish I have a camera to wear when I go to the court. And the police department has a parking space in front of the court that you can park. So, because the parking is difficult, and to find a space to go into the sessions or that, you need to be on time and so on. So the police department, it's not for me, it's for everybody who works for the police department. And actually for me, I have to have a sticker to say that, hey, this is a car belonging to the police department. So I park there. But every morning when I get out of my car, and either I would see the look in people like, oh, you're gonna get a ticket. Or the ones that they are nice and they come to me like, last time I parked here and I got a ticket, you need to move your car. Or the one like, do you know how to read that sign? And so and it's the assumption of even that I've been here for almost 18 years, and I do, I don't know how to read. I have an accent. It's not gonna go away. Even my daughters tell me that. But the assumption of I don't belong from people that they don't know me. It's just because I parked in somewhere that I shouldn't park at. And that's the start. And then even to go, the security inside, and I see them with everybody who works at the police department. They just, they say, hey, good morning, and they go in. Every time they have to search my bag, and it's like, I work at the police department. Why you have to search my bag? So I stopped taking my bag, and I just take a folder, I take stuff, then I take my phone, and they still wanted to see, open my phone and look. So I had a really kind of not a nice cover for it. So every time the security opened it, then he look at the picture like, all right, and then he just turn it off because it's none of his business to open. But he doesn't have a right to do that. But I'm saying just the treatment of, just being a different. And that's the struggle. And I think for some, my look, because I don't cover. I kind of wear the scarf as a form of a fashion. Wear it year round, the winter, summer, whatever. But, being a black, I think, it's the truth. Even today, when I was getting ready, and I was like, what should I wear? Should I wear, jeans? Should I? And it's like, I don't think usually just Americans, they focus on that, or they consider like, yeah, what should I wear, or what should I, how should I look? But I personally, and I think most of the communities of the African Americans or the Muslims, or that we would kind of extra a couple minutes to thought about that. Especially for my work, I really try, and I try my best to wear like a jacket and a nice clothes, and to present myself well, because I should, but it's still that sometimes people don't take it as I'm a professional and as I'm working there, and they still question my existence. To be even at the court, even when I go to the court and I go behind the gauge and talk to the detectives or go talk to the clerk or whoever, or carrying police department folders and talking about it, or sometimes I would be in a wedding room and the detective would bring somebody to talk to me, and they look at me like, this is the one? Like, yeah. So it's, it feels like you have to prove yourself every day with every, move that you do. With that said, I have a lot of different, some of them are here, and we can't put everyone in one basket. So there is the good and the bad everywhere. But I personally, and some people disagree with me, I feel I came to the United States and I'm here, and I'm willing to prove myself, and I'm willing to put myself out there. However, I'm not willing to be mistreated, and I wouldn't just accept it. So.
Thank you. I'm gonna do two things. I'm gonna time out and have you introduce yourself so that we know who our final panelist is. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hello. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. My brothers and sisters in faith and in humanity. My name is Dauda Jang, Dauda Abdullahi Jang. My father is from Senegal, West Africa. My mother is from Germany, originally. Senegal is where I was influenced with Islam, first being that's where my father's from. And it's a country that's about, I'd say, about 90% Muslim. And was born in New Hampshire. Born in New Hampshire, did some traveling, lived in New York City for a while, and all over, up and down the East Coast. But yeah, that's the basics of me. Yeah, Dauda Jang. I give you some of the name. The name Dauda is translates to, in Arabic, it's Dawood. In Hebrew, it would be David. You can switch the V and the U, just like a Jose and a Joseph or something like that. So, and then in Senegal, they'll add the A. Just a slight difference there. Same with my middle name, Abdullahi. In Arabic, it would be Abdullah, which is basically meaning the slave of Allah. Yeah, that's basics for me.
Can you give us some context? Are you in school or working?
Right now, I am not in school right now, working. I work mostly as a cook, also as a car salesman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rashida kind of jumped my list a little bit, but I think it's a relevant question. And no, it's wonderful. And perhaps we'll have all of you kind of offer some thoughts about it. So the question is really about, we often make assumptions about what someone who identifies as Muslim might look like. So if you can talk a little bit about your particular racial, spiritual, gender intersections, and how those identities intersect, overlap, converge, contrast. Talk a little bit about what those pieces might mean to you.
One of the biggest things in Islam that I've learned that I appreciate is that we believe that Islam is for all time and for all people, and that it is able to, one of the biggest beauties is that it basically is a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, basically. So we're not required to be, basically there's like a dress code. There's a certain code or etiquettes that we go by, but you can also add your culture, your experience. So for instance, in Arabic, my name being Dawood, but it's perfectly Muslim to add an A and put a little bit of African flavor, You might see in some Arabian countries, there might be a little bit more strict with the dress code, for instance. Maybe all men might wear white and all women wear black. Or in Egypt, maybe it's vice versa. But then you go to Africa and you see bright, bright, bright colors, And for me personally, I also feel that I feel it's kind of part of my purpose that I was placed in a place without a lot of Muslims, without a lot of Africans, to be able to share, My parents, me being the oldest, when I was born, the government name that they gave me actually, just not knowing my personality yet, or if worrying about if I was going to get picked on or anything like that, so they gave me the translation of the name David. I don't remember the exact age, but probably before even 10 years old. I knew my name, and I was proud of it. I was proud of the uncle I was named after, proud of the the culture, the heritage, and I was one of maybe 3 black kids in the school too. And I went, and once I found out we can change it legally, we did that. And I always, I knew we were different, but I never felt ashamed of that. thank God. I can understand people that maybe have those type of problems. But personally, I took it as a source of a pride and used it as a way, you know, always wanted to interact with people and, you know, share my faith, my background, and everything like that, you know, because my belief is that we are all human first. I think most people can agree with that, you know, and a lot of us, we're afraid of what we don't know, and that goes for all of us. That's a natural human instinct, I think. And, but usually, I find that it's very rare that when somebody gets to know me a little bit that, you know, their preconceived ideas that they might have don't go away. You know, so I enjoy that personally. But not to get into too much detail, but yeah. Yep.
For me, I would have to agree with Rashida. I kind of had the same experience with like always having to prove myself in both communities. And I am Somali, I am Kenyan, you know, I am Muslim, I am a female. So having all of those social identities impacted me more negatively than positively. Like I always had to prove myself to people, prove myself in a position. And I was always afraid of like, you know, what if this person does something to me, or how am I gonna react and respond and deal with it? I think I'm more confident now than I was when I was younger. When I was younger, I was a firecracker. Like, if someone said something to me, I just had to, you know.
She's still a firecracker.
I still am, but I'm more calm now. Like, I'll use my words now compared to before. Before, I was like, you know what? Let's fight. But for me, I think in Manchester, there's a huge Somali community. The most difficult thing I had growing up with was trying to fit in my Somali community because I was different. I didn't want the norm. I didn't want to get married in high school. I didn't want to have children at a young age. And a lot of people can't accept the fact that like I didn't want children for a long time. Now I'm just like, you know, one child, that's it. But it was difficult for me. When I was in high school, I played sports, and when Muslim parents would see my school uniform, they had a problem, and they would like go to my mom's house and be like, "Oh, did you know your daughter was wearing this?" And my mom's like, "Yes, I drove her to school. She's on the tennis team. Yes, I know what she was wearing." Okay, and it got to a point I think it impacted my mom negatively too, because we had to like move away from a large Somali community. Like now we live near Wellington Road, and I think there's only one other Somali person that lives around the area. So like my mom really had to get away because she saw how it was impacting me, and it was also impacting her because other parents would be like, "Oh, you're not telling your kids they should act this way because they're Muslim. Why isn't your daughter wearing the hijab?" You know, like people would call me like, you know, "You're a fake Muslim," and ta-da-da. But my whole life, I grew up learning the culture. I grew up learning the language. I grew up learning the religion. At a young age, I had to go to Arabic school. I had to learn the Quran and stuff. But people see me as less of a Muslim because I don't cover my hair. And I always had to tell them, you know, being a Muslim is about peace, you know, and you shouldn't judge someone. I'm like, just because I don't cover my hair doesn't make me less of a Muslim. And I'm like, just because you cover your hair doesn't mean you're following all the rules and regulations surrounding the religion too. I'm like, you're worse than me, girl. But but in high school, it was just a lot. So I really had to stand my ground, find my confidence, and also just be comfortable with myself and my skin. I think that took me the longest to deal with. It took up till 7th grade, because 7th grade I got in a big trouble. I got suspended from school for a whole week. And I had to tell my mother, like, oh my God, like, you know, I went home, she wasn't home, and I cleaned, I cooked, I was trying to butter her up, and I had to tell her, like, you know, I got suspended from school because I did this. But when I was younger, I always tried to justify my action, like, oh my God, I had to, Mom, like, I had to fight them. And growing up, like, I fight with my words more because I rather educate you than fight you, because I'm like, throwing hands isn't going to get me anywhere. I'm not trying to get a case. But I really had to find myself. I really had to find who I am as a person, and also find the things that I like about me to survive in both of my communities. So it's still a work in progress. I'm not perfect, but I like who I am as a person because I see the change within myself, and you know, I'm proud of where I am in life right now.
What a cool story. Thank you. It reminds me, there's a story I often tell people that in the early days of the community of Muslims, the Prophet and a couple of his companions used to walk down a very narrow street of Medina. And at the end of the street, every day, invariably, there would be a woman who would throw trash on the Prophet. And he'd walk down the street and she'd throw trash on him, and walk down, she'd throw trash on him. And his companions near him said, "We'll go ahead of you. We'll make sure she's not there," or we'll go talk to her. And he'll say, "No." They say, we'll let us stop her. And he'd say, "No." So one day he was walking down the path, and there was no woman and no trash. So he went to her house to find out if she was okay. So just, that's the way we need to treat those people. It's about them. It's not about us. I have a story that relates a little bit to what Rashida said. When I first started doing my talks, I often wore, because my family's worn it and people wear it all the time, a black and white checked scarf, a kafia or shamar, as part of my my shtick, if you will. Because I'm comfortable wearing it, and I'm always like to fiddle with stuff anyway, and it has these bits on the edges that I can fiddle with. But invariably, the talk became about the scarf. Well, terrorists wear that, or why do you wear that, and so on. So I had to drop the scarf in order to be able to continue with the things that I think were really important. And I think we're, all of us, probably at that point where people just take the most sort of superficial kinds of comments or actions or methods of dress and make them into some sort of stereotypical manifestation of a Muslim's behavior or dress or commitment to a community. I know, in fact, 2 families in New Hampshire that have left New Hampshire in the last year because their middle school children were being harassed and bullied, and the school wasn't stepping up, simply saying, well, that happens to all middle school kids. Like, really? Every middle school girl gets her hijab tucked on every day, and every boy named Muhammad gets called terrorist every day? I don't think so. But I think for all of us in some way, one of the happiest days will be when we are fully empowered as citizens, where we're not sort of Muslim Americans, but Americans who are Muslim, and we haven't crossed that barrier yet. We're still sort of Muslim Americans, and I resent that sometimes. And it sometimes comes from Muslims. Sometimes there are Muslims that are invested in keeping the separation and trying to keep one community pitted or marginalized against the other. So we need to be aware, I think, that we all have these sort of interests and people sort of jockeying for power and privilege on both sides and wanting to sort of exploit differences when, in fact, the very fact that you're all here giving up an NFL Sunday or one of the last beautiful Sundays we may have until, March or April, says that this is an important issue to people, and I'd like to think that someday you'll be here not because I'm a Muslim American, but because I'm an American who's Muslim. And alhamdulillah, that someday that will be the day that we'll celebrate together.
Thank you. So I guess one of my next questions is, there's there's a lot of confusion about what it means to be Muslim, or what it doesn't mean to be Muslim. Can you talk about something that you feel is really misunderstood about being Muslim, and teach us what we need to know to correct our misconception?
I think the thing that really we need to fully understand is that there's only one God. It's a part, we are the third of the monotheistic traditions, that we worship the same God, we have the same origins, we share the same prophets. But beyond that, whether you're a monotheist or not, we share the same human values. The Quran is constantly telling us that mercy and compassion and forgiveness are the highest attributes, that justice is what we strive for. And there is no contradiction between, sure, there are elements of faith, like the divinity of Jesus and so on. Those are elements of faith. But what God expects of humanity does not vary from Muslim to Christian to Jew to Buddhist to Zoroastrian to Wiccans to Unitarians, whatever. And I have a very good Unitarian friend in this audience, and she and I embrace the same values. It would never be a question of discussion. We are one people made to serve God, and we serve God by serving each other.
That's beautiful, thank you.
I think one thing that people misunderstand is just because we're Muslims, people don't see us as human beings, which I don't understand. It's always like, oh, you must be violent, oh, you must be a terrorist and stuff, and people, like, I get it, the media doesn't really help the image, and they put everyone in a marginalized group, but also they don't know how to see us as humans first. Like, I have feelings just like you, I have emotions just like you, I have values and morals just like you, and people don't focus on what we have, what kind of similar interests we have. They focus on all the differences instead. And I think something that gets misunderstood a lot is the religion, and people thinking it's very violent, and they think that the religion has something to do with the radical groups, and that is not the case. The religion's actually very peaceful. It's always talking about forgiveness. It's always talking about we're a brotherhood, we're family, and people don't really understand that because they don't give Muslims the chance to explain themselves. They're not giving them the chance. They don't even give them the benefit of doubt. Like, as soon as I say I'm a Muslim, like, some friends will be like, oh. And, like, they're not going to reach out to you anymore. They're not going to hang out with you anymore. You don't get approached in class because, now you're Muslim. It's a problem. It's like, before that, before you didn't know I was a Muslim, you had no issues with me. Just because I told you this is one of my social identities, you have a problem. So I think it's a lot of, like, it's misunderstanding, and also it's many people being uneducated. They're not willing to learn. They're not open-minded. And I blame the media, but also people do have to realize that at the end of the day, we're all humans. We all have feelings. We all have emotions. Yeah, it's just misunderstanding. I really wish that people, just be open-minded. You don't even have to get educated. Just be open-minded and just treat me like a human being, period. And that should be more important than what my social identities are as a person.
Yeah, I would say, to build on what was previously said, I would say, a lot of the things are that the confusions that I would say are largely based around lack of education, information warfare. I think that we know that there's a lot of elements to war. It's not just shooting guns and fighting. It's also psychological. It's also trying to get the minds of people. And there's not a lot of, I think that people that think for themselves are a minority, So the masses, it's nothing new that the masses oftentimes don't have, correct views and perspectives on things, but that doesn't mean that it can't change. And especially in a time like today, the way that we communicate, the way that we interact, the way that we travel. I'm very optimistic personally for these times. With all the trials and tribulations that happen, I think that that's just a necessary part for us to learn. Individually, that's how it goes in our lives, and I think it goes the same as a group. I want to point out also that I think a lot of the progress also comes from non-Muslims as well. If you look at like the civil rights movement, for instance, from what I understand, I wasn't alive during the time, but from what I understand is that it was not nearly as strong until the white Americans also that had good hearts, that knew that this was wrong, stood up and started speaking to their people and educating their people as well. And we're seeing that, we're seeing it from both sides and from all, the good people, the strong people that are willing to stand up. And, we're seeing it a lot. And for us, I think the best formula is what we always do, is we follow the footsteps of our prophet, of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, and of the other prophets as well, which is, we all know, leading with love, leading with forgiveness, mercy, understanding, compassion, those type of things. And sometimes the person that is the most disgusting and evil seeming and harshest enemy can become one of your closest brothers. And we see this, we learn about these stories too, even back in the times of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And usually those kind of people, again, it just really comes down to education, and it comes down to familiarizing yourselves with each other and interacting and whatnot. And I mean, even things like marriage and things like that, my parents are from two completely different worlds, different faiths, and everything like that. And then, you get a child like me in a place around here, and there's a whole group of people that would have never learned about these things. And I think these are the main ways that I think that these things will get better. My mother, I remember a story of her telling me about her aunt, who's also German and white, telling her from before she met my father, before any of that, back in Germany, that, one day everybody is gonna kind of look like, me, like us, everybody's gonna mix, basically. And I mean, how can you hate your child if, your daughter marries somebody from another race or something like that? You might be a little upset at first, but then, after some time and after generations pass, I think things will get better like that, That's the best thing, I think, that we could do. But yeah.
I think I would think about one story that after September 11, and we were going from the police department, we were going to a conference in Chicago, and the lieutenant who was in charge of getting the trip paperwork and that's ready for the whole group came and said to me, hey, can I have your license? I'm just going to check everybody online so we can be there whenever. And I said, I don't think you can check me online. And she's like, why? Like, because my last name. And she's like, oh no, this is paid by the government. They already paid for it, but we just have to confirm. I'm like, all right, here's my license. So she sat online, she checked everybody. We were 15. And then she checked me and checked with the customer service. And she comes, she's like, Rashida, what did you do? Like, I didn't do anything. It's just my last name, So I think it's the society, it's the system that's just put us all in one basket. Even that, I work for the police department and the conference was paid. It's a federal funded grant to go to the training, and they send our names and they approved it and everything. However, the system is still flagged me as a person that might do something. So I think that's the challenge.
I will ask, it's not on your sheets, but for those of us in the room that remember a pre and a post 9/11, can you talk about what the implications were in your mind's eye?
You mean when it happened?
pre and post, right? When you think about the Muslim community, what was the impact of 9/11?
I think now, every time, even the last shooting, the first thing you think, I hope it's not a Muslim. It's not that it's okay it's happened at all. It's not okay. But then, not a black person, not an immigrant. You know, so you think about all the consequences that we have to deal with it after the September 11th. And now we think, okay, this is going to just put us back, you know, in a worse situation than where we are already in. So before, they were the challenge, but it's not as there is an obvious reason for it that some people would say, but because of what happened on September 11 and because what they did it, or you know, who did it are Muslims. So this is okay, and it's okay to, so we can be safe. And I always say, you know, if by checking me twice or 3 times or setting me in a spot that, you know, to keep everybody safe, if that's by me, then hey, I don't mind. However, it doesn't happen that way, right? So I think the struggle is now, it's just we are hoping not to get worse, because it's already bad. But then when there is a shooting or there is anything, we think, oh, I hope. Yeah, it's just, for me, it's automatically. Like, just not a Muslim, not a black, not an immigrant. You go through the line and then like, no, it shouldn't be that. It should be why, without who, you know. But that's, I think what's, yeah.
I would say pre and post 9/11. I mean, I don't want to sound like naive in the way that I'm optimistic. You know, I'm not going to act like I don't have any concerns or these things don't affect me. But again, I kind of want to point to, even as terrible as that is, you know, you look today, Islam is still the fastest growing religion. And as bad as those things are, for instance, it's raised a lot of questions. And it's made people that weren't willing to just say, oh, they're all bad, say, wait a minute, well, let's find out, you know, what is their belief? Who are they? Are they really what they are being made out to be? You know, and, you know, anger can get anyone to be very irrational, you know, and it's obviously an extremely sensitive situation and topic. But I usually try to remind people and try to get them to think about their just basic human tendencies, you know, and we talk about things like bullying and things like this. And this is not at all to justify the actions, but I will say that I ask people to remember that neither side is innocent. Keep in mind, you know, what happens when money is involved and things like that. And I think that money is a big root, and resources are a big root. And a lot of the world powers, it's not new that they go to other places where there's a lot of resources and take it. It's not new. So if somebody did that on a personal level, they went into your house and they took your things, they raped your wife or killed your kids and things like that, you might be pretty angry, you might do something very irrational and drastic as well. I'm not justifying that because it's not what we're taught. We're still taught, even if that, you don't retaliate that way, you know. I usually, again, I try to go back to the Sunnah, which is the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and you look at the times that even when they were in war, you know, I understand that he was the first to basically implement rules of war, you know. There was a lot more savagery at the time, for instance, and things like that. And, you know, like, for instance, retaliating like that, you're not supposed to do that. Same that the rules of any legitimate, civilized, you know, country would follow, we're supposed to follow as well. But pre 9/11, I would say, obviously, there wasn't as much animosity. It wasn't as ramped up, and it wasn't as much fear and fear-mongering. it wasn't, Islam wasn't, Muslims weren't under so much of a microscope, and we weren't being treated, being, the scapegoat basically for the world's problems. But I ask people also to remember, that Muslims have been in this country from the very start. Whether it was many of the slaves from my father's part of the world that were already Muslim, and then also the minute that we had immigrants, we've had Muslims. And I ask also people to remember that, we're not all Arabic. Only about 15% of us are Arabic, for instance. People think usually of just the Arabic, countries, but I ask everybody to just think of us as a whole, basically, and that microscope did get worse, and there was a lot of, retaliation afterwards. A lot of us worried about our sisters and our children and everything like that, and we've seen some terrible things that have happened like that. But we persevere, and we lead with love and with mercy. And I think that is actually, one of the strongest things that you can see. There was a story of a girl, I think it was England, that during Ramadan, somebody came and viciously killed her. And the girl's father publicly came out and, basically, I don't know how, but I do know how, but did what he was supposed to do spiritually, as a spiritual person, and gave it up to Allah, gave it up to the justice system, didn't show hatred towards the person. The imam also came out, and there was a mob that was going to hurt the person, and he stopped it. Now, to me, that example for the world to see is as strong as it gets, And, I don't know the exact quote, but the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to say along those lines that basically strength is not, striking or, striking with your sword, for instance. It's being able to, to not use it when you're angry. And it may not be fair and all of those type of things, how we've been treated, but it is what it is. We have to deal with it. And I think that these dialogues that we're doing on this level is very important, and also on an individual level. I always encourage, if you know a Muslim person and you have questions, ask us. We enjoy that. We really do. We like to be asked, as long as obviously it's respectful and everything like that, and it's for with good intention. But yeah, I'll stop there.
For me, one of the things is when a crime does happen and I see on the news, I do have that feeling like, please don't let it be a Muslim. Only because when it is, it just gets 10 times worse, I feel like. I feel like we're just going backwards constantly. And normally when I do see it on the news, it's always like, oh, before, they don't even find the suspect and they say, oh, a terrorist act. And a terrorist act, they're not saying a terrorist act, like what terrorist actually means. They're associating it with it being a Muslim, potentially. And then when they find out it's not a Muslim, they don't call it a terrorist act. They just say, oh, so-and-so did this. But it is a crime of terrorism. And it's the media, and it's unfortunate that that's the way it is. But I feel like discussions like this is a start, and hosting programs and events, just educating people, it's really important. On our campus last week or the week before, I did an event called Enlightenment. It's the first event to happen on campus, and it was addressing Islam and Islamophobia. It was a great turnout, and it was just amazing to see administration and students of SNU come together and actually learn, and some of my professors came. And it was a great turnout. We had around 80 people, and I just think it's important to continue stuff like that, Because a lot of people, they just don't know. They're just curious, but they don't know how to go about it. And, if I'm approached in a respectful manner, yes, I will answer your question. Yes, I'll have a dialogue. But if I'm approached like, oh, what does it feel like to be a terrorist? And it's like, obviously, I'm going to feel some type of way, But I think it's a start, Dialogues like this, it's a start. We're not where we should be, but it's a lot better than being shut out. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Well, first, a quick historical reflection. It's true. I mean, Muslims have been in this country for, well, next year will be for 400 years. I mean, if we accept the figure that between 25 and 30% of the slaves who were brought to America were Muslim, and we know that the first slaves were brought to America in 1619 to the Jamestown colony, a year, I might add, before any of the descendants of the Mayflower can claim lineage. They didn't get here until 1620, so we got here first. Muslims have been here for 400 years, have fought and died in every war that this country has had, participating in its building, and its construction, and its growth, and its promise. And it's important to recognize that Muslims did not appear like Topsy on 9/11. But I think what's happened, I'm going to take a couple minutes if you'll indulge me. At 9/11, everyone was shocked. For non-Muslims, it was being attacked by a people speaking a language that few people understood, espousing a religion that nobody knew anything about, and expressing grievances that no one could relate to. And being part of some interfaith dialogue at that time, I realized that both Muslims, a lot of Muslims went sort of underground, went quiet, and it took 2 or 3 years to even start any substantial dialogue between the communities to learn to trust each other again. And it was getting better until about 2007, 2008, when a black man had the effrontery to think that he could be president in what most people wanted to continue defining as a white Christian country. But they couldn't call him all of those terrible names that they had spent the last 300 years calling black people. So they decided to call him Kenyan, other, foreign, and Muslim. They made him the enemy and a representation of all that was non-white in this country. And in 2011, that was a meme that was embraced by Donald Trump and expressed to this day still. So it's not simply that we're dealing with Islamophobia anymore in this country. We're dealing with an expression of Islamophobia where the word Muslim means more than just Muslims. It means everyone who they see as the other, those that they can't name and quantify in the way that they used to in the Jim Crow days. So I think we have to be very careful about how we define communities and how we define names and call people names, because it's no longer just Muslims anymore. And when they come after Muslims, they're coming after someone else tomorrow. When they come after Jews in Pittsburgh, they may be coming after Muslims or Zoroastrians tomorrow. When they get along, when they can get one, they can get it all. So it's not a question, you know, as I was talking to someone yesterday in Peterborough, and he said, well, why are you doing this? I said, I don't want to convert anyone to Islam. I don't even care if you like me or Islam. All I want is for you to acknowledge that I have an equal space in the public square that you have. And when that presence is acknowledged and defined, then we can start making progress. But until then, when we have to sort of beg or ask or negotiate our way into the public space, then we're not seen as Americans in the same kind of standing that the people who have fought and died for this war have. So that's my grievance for the day. And enjoy your break.
Quick break, everyone, quick break. We're going to kind of cozy on up and really give you some time to ask some questions. So I will be the evil person who brings you the mic so that we can capture it on audio. And this group of panelists will take their time to respond to your question. So go ahead and think them through and then Give me a wave when you have a question you're ready to ask. This is the first.
So what I wanted to know after listening to a lot of your stories is what part of your faith do you draw from? Is there a tradition, a ritual, something that you do, something that's just part of the Islamic faith that you draw from in order to give you strength, particularly through these times?
For me, I would have to say Ramadan. It's a month long. You fast and you learn it's a lot of self-discipline, and it's all about giving back to the community. It's all about being a better you, like no swearing, no gossiping. There's a lot of things that you can't do, but it's normally, for me, it's the month that I learn to be a better me. I should be doing most of those things all year round, but sometimes you just get lost in life and you don't realize a lot of the stuff that you do until the month of Ramadan. You have to restrain from doing so much, and it's like, wow, like I took all these things for grateful, and I can't do it right now. But I think that's the holiday that I feel the most connected to.
For me, I can definitely relate also with Ramadan. It's a great experience that I would say as well. I think most Muslims also, the biggest thing that I would say that I refer to is, again, the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, along with the Quran. The next text that we follow is the Hadith, which is basically, before technology of having a camera, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was always with companions, and everything that he did, said, ways that he handled things, and everything, pretty much was recorded, and in a very systematic way, and even down to judging who recorded it, and even if they were getting older and they started losing their wits, for instance, they mark when that happened, so if this can be as trusted or not, and as good as you can do during that time. And I would say that's one of the biggest things that I draw from, to get examples on how to handle things, and to remind ourselves on how to handle situations, how to what type of perspectives to look at. I draw from that, for example. And other than that, I would also say Salah, which is our prayer. A lot of people, I'm sure, are familiar with the formal prayers that you've probably seen us doing. But we also have something called dua, which is more like informal type of a prayer. In Islam, we believe there's no intercessors. We believe in praying directly to Allah. We don't believe in doing confession and things like that. And that is a very powerful thing, for me. I was telling somebody recently, they were talking about the book The Secret, and how that changed their life, and how, speaking things into existence and having, positive affirmations and all of that. And I said, to me, that sounds like dua, where, we believe, obviously, that everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if we need something or want something, we need to ask there first, really. And yeah, I get a lot out of that, I would say, because the salah also, the prayer also gives you a very big source of like a meditation type of feeling as well. We're supposed to pray 5 times a day. The prayers are based off of the lunar, the sun, basically, and I find that also, not just spiritually, but that also there's a lot of physical benefits to that as well. Waking up at a certain time and, praying and all of that, it gives you a break in the day. It basically, we also believe that washes your minor sins throughout the day. you know, and it also, for me, helps you stay in check. It reminds you, you think about what you did in between the last time, and you have to be conscious of what you're doing, you know. One of the things we do is called wudu, which we have a spiritual wash that we do if, you know, we break our cleanliness that we have to do before we pray. So maybe something you might do, you know, you think, well, I got to go pray too, or just having it on your mind. You know, a big thing for us, we say that we remind our brothers and sisters about things. All of us, we know what's good and bad, but we all need reminders, you know. So I'd say that's the biggest things for me. And also brotherhood, sisterhood, you know, definitely those things. That's what I go to.
One of the things that I think of during the day, first I have this definition of prayer as being a combination of sort of yoga and mindfulness, you know, sort of 5 times a day shutting out the outside world and just having this this space that belongs exclusively to me through which I can communicate with God. But as I move through the day, there's this wonderful expression that we have called inshallah, if God wills it. And it's a constant reminder. You know, somebody says, you know, can you pick me up at 5:30 this afternoon? I'll say inshallah. It really doesn't mean, you know, maybe I will and maybe I won't. It really means, you know, that let's just acknowledge that there's a higher power for us. Now, there are some people that use it, like Baba. I know I'm only a freshman in high school, but the head of the football team has asked me to go to the prom with him. Do you think I can go? Inshallah. You know, we know that's not going to happen. But, you know, but this constant reminder that there's something greater than ourselves in this world. And upon that greatness, I built all the relationships that we encounter during the day with each other. And in our own work, I just love that. I love that kind of reminder. And I try to use it as often as I can, except when I'm getting pulled over, you know, and then I just sort of say, yeah, sure, sir, you know, it's okay.
Just to follow up with the story of inshallah, Fatima, my youngest daughter, who's 27 now, when she finished high school, me and her dad, we thought it would be a good idea for her to go to Sudan and just connect with the family and be there for a while before she would come back for college. And she stayed there for 6 months. And she was talking to me on the phone about when she's coming back and, you know, when I'm getting the ticket and discussing her travel back. And I said, okay, inshallah. And she's like, you know what? This is what I learned in Sudan. People, when they don't want to do something, they say inshallah. So you need to tell me now if you're going to do it or not. So, yeah, so when you kind of know, you just leave it in God's hand and he might not. And then it wouldn't be your fault, right? But I think Ramadan is the fasting is not Ramadan, because recently I started with a dear friend that also to fast 2 days a week, not, you know, just Ramadan. And because of for me, the peace that I feel, not on the rush, like, okay, you know, what for lunch, what I'm going to cook for dinner, do I want to go to the grocery, and other things, but also personally, at work, I deal with a lot of challenging cases and people. You know, even the victims, when they are violated and they are mistreated by somebody that they love and they care for. And I'm limited to what I can offer and what I can do for them. And sometimes I feel that I'm getting frustrated. So I think that's a reminder of I'm not in control. And I have to let it go and let it be. And I do my best, and I believe on that. And I believe that's what's kind of centered me more than anything else. So I don't want to say Ramadan, because that's we just put it in 1 month, and then we fast on that month, and then until next year. But it's continuous of doing it. You know, of course, it's hard to fast every day, but to keep doing it. So to bring that center and that feeling of kind of in peace, and you're not in control, and you don't have to think about you. What's going to happen next?
When you were talking earlier in the panel, you triggered a memory for me, and so I want to tell you this little bit of a story first before I ask you my question. I was born here in New Hampshire in a very small town, and I think I went to first grade in 1960. And we had a family farm, and we were poor. I got one pair of shoes a year, free, you know, from the church. And we were very church-oriented, but we were Protestant, and at the time I had no idea what that meant. I thought everyone in our town went to the same church. So I go to first grade, and there's a new little girl there that I hadn't met before, and I loved her. I was totally in love. I wanted to be her best friend, and I wanted to hang out with her. And she said, I'm going to see if you can come over to my house after school sometime. And I said, all right, great. So she comes back to school, and she's not talking to me. She won't talk to me. And I was like, what's going on, you know? And she said, I can't play with you anymore. And I said, why? She said, you're not Catholic. And I was like, what's Catholic? It was my first time I even became aware that there were different religions, you know? So I go home to my mom and I say, Mom, what's Catholic? And so my mom has got to explain to me, you know, what that is. And I said, well, you know, can we go to that church? Because I really want to be friends with this girl, you know. But, you know, so that was my first time knowing that there were different people in the world. And I wondered if you experienced that with Islam, like what it was like for you growing up, and were you in that kind of community where you didn't encounter anyone of different, you know what I mean? Like, what was your experience like?
I would say for me, in Sudan, we have people, the people from the southern Sudan, they are Christian and they're not Muslim. And when I was in high school, I noticed that when we have a religion class, and when our Muslim religion class, the girls, they get up and like, why I can't live with them, you know? Why they have to leave and we have to stay. But also, when we have a government in 1985, and they came and they said that Sharia law, which is the religious law, is going to be the law of the country. And that's mean all the Muslims, especially women, they have to cover. And I was like, so now the ones that are not covered, they will be targeted, and they will be known, and they will be, those are not the Muslim one. And I objected to that. And that's actually always become, it is my challenge, and it still is, with the cover, with the dress code, you know. And I know there is some Muslims here, and maybe we will kind of disagree on what I see, but the explanation for me of covering the hair, it's just, I don't agree with it, because it said that, you know, we cover because we arouse men. And I was like, you know, if your penis in my head, too bad. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. And I was like, why we have, now those my friends, those the girls that I grew up with, I went to school with, and now we are different from them. So everybody gonna know those are the Muslims girls and those are the non-Muslims. And that's kind of when I became vocal about what I see. And I have, you know, known about it, talked about it with my family and cousins and so on. But publicly, when it's become public and it's become like there will be a difference in the community. It's exactly like when I found out I'm black when I came to the United States. You know, I didn't know. I never knew that I'm black. So I came to the United States at the airport, filling the immigration papers, and I was like, crazy with that. I left it. And then an immigration officer came to me, actually, and he told me, you missed this, and he pointed to me what I missed. It's not, you need to choose. It's chosen. I was like, seriously? So that day, I knew that I'm black. So, and you know, so similar to that.
Just to add one thing, I believe that any time a religious act is determined or codified by the government, it becomes non-religious by compulsion. So I think that women who cover because any government or their family or their husband or their brother or whatever says that they have to cover, even if they cover, their covering becomes non-religious. And I think, I'm going to just diverge a little bit from your question because I think this is important. The issue, gender issues are really important in Islam these days, not just within the genders themselves, but globally. And one of the things that's really happening in this country is that a lot of interesting work is being done by Muslim women in the United States that can't be done in other countries, and is being watched by women around the world as what is possible for Muslim women to do. For example, the first tafsir, the first exegetical understanding of the Quran ever done completely by a woman was done in this country. The only mosque in the world that I know of that is women only is in this country. The only two mosques I know of where men and women pray side by side in the same line, even though they're not related to each other, is in this country. And I think perhaps now one in Germany. Now, there are many people who disagree with those on theological grounds. But I shudder to think of what would happen to them if they were doing these experiments somewhere else. So one of my arguments against this Islamophobia is that if we shut down this creative work that's being done by women, even if we don't approve of it all, we're shutting down the aspirations and this sense of possibility that's being made for others around the world that don't have the freedom that we do. It's for that purpose, for example, that I will not worship in a mosque where the women pray in a separate room from the men, in the basement or upstairs, and they watch the imam on closed circuit and so on, because it does not follow a model that was created by the Prophet Muhammad, and it contradicts both the literature, the scripture, and the practice of the time. It's exciting to be a Muslim in the United States these days. And we often get into conflict with each other because we're experimenting with it all. And so it's fun to be up here with, you know, my three brothers and sisters. And I'm sure we don't agree on everything. But that's to your benefit and also to ours. And, you know, we just sort of play it, but that's why I just find this Islamophobia so odious. Because I know that people just watching it from everywhere else, women in the Sudan, women in Somalia, women in Senegal, women in Nigeria, women in Indonesia, in Malaysia, who don't have the freedoms that we do and the guarantees that we do. You know, there's a reason why freedom of religion is not only in the First Amendment, but it's the first item of freedom in the First Amendment. And it's something we just need to keep remembering and reminding ourselves about. Excuse my preaching, but it's Sunday, and you know.
I would just to touch on that quickly. You know, obviously as a male, I can only speak from a male perspective. I'll never try to say that I can relate. I can maybe understand. But one of the things that I love about Islam is that there is a part of Islam that we call haqq, which is basically, it is like that's the rules. But then outside of that, there's a lot up for interpretation. And something I heard recently when somebody was talking about politics, I found it very interesting. They were talking about the Constitution, and they were talking about how basically it was not a document that was supposed to be taken literal from just that time only, and then it was supposed to be applied now. It's supposed to be reinterpreted every generation, because they can only anticipate so much, you know. And I believe it goes the same for Islam and the rules and everything as well. You know, I'm sure if you look at almost any legitimate scripture, you'll see all the time there's things like, wow, that feels like they're talking right now. Or there's things that that the time, if, you know, when it was revealed, they wouldn't have the same perspective, or certain things wouldn't be known yet. And I think if you go from, again, if you go from different parts of the world, you know, a lot of us, we see the most strict, harsh examples of Islam. And I think, you know, some of that is on purpose, and I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but then we don't often see that places like where my father's from, Senegal, or Indonesia, I think if you ask the women, there's of course many, you know, individual cases where there's issues, just like anywhere else, with rights for women. But I think there's a great examples set there where women have choices, you know, and have freedom. And I'm not saying we can't do any better, but I think there's definitely a lot of different examples of that. And the way that I approach it is the way that my parents did with me. You know, I was never forced. You know, there's no compulsion in Islam. Even if you dominate a country and you take prisoners of war, we are not allowed, we're not supposed to force anyone to be Muslim. That's not real either, you know. If it's not in your heart and you don't feel it, it's fake anyway. You know, that's how I look at it. I just, you know, I look at it that way, and I do agree absolutely that this is one of the best parts about this country. I say all the time, I am in no way anti-American, but I am critical at times because I think we can do better, you know. And I think that we are unique, and that's one of the main reasons we are such a great country, is that we are a melting pot of all faiths, of people, and that makes us, when we do it right, a great example for everywhere, you know. And that's with that. Now, just as far as the the story that you told and the question, I think I can relate in a major way, but to the girl probably, you know, being, we know the demographic here in New Hampshire. You know, my father and mother decided that they were gonna move from, my father was in New York almost from the beginning, you know, when he came to this country, and they decided that they're gonna live here. You know, immigrant family, I'm sure that they looked at the statistics and, you know, the schooling, and the intentions were absolutely, I'm sure, were pure, and they wanted the best. But I know they didn't anticipate probably some of the issues that we did encounter as children. You know, whether it be because I was Muslim or black or different or anything like that, you know, we definitely went through a lot of discrimination and a lot, you know, from different levels of people too. And it wasn't always like we could identify them. You know, sometimes it was your principal, it was your coach, it was the police officer, and they're smiling in your face, but you don't know that they're behind scenes. That's the reason you didn't play the whole game. That's the reason that you didn't get this position or whatever it was. You know, so those type of things were definitely tough. And socially, you know, being, you know, different, skin color, religion, and everything like that, definitely. For me, the skin color was the thing that, you know, stuck out more. As a male, also, not having to wear the traditional hijab, it's a little easier on us. You know, I respect our sisters that cover and don't, you know. But the sisters that do cover absolutely go through way more scrutiny, you know, and they really go through a lot dealing with that. So yeah, I mean, I could tell you some stories. I could tell you a million stories of fights and all kind of stuff that I got into when I was a kid. But I wouldn't actually change it personally. I personally wouldn't change it. I think that this is the way. I feel personally that there was an ideal circumstance that made me who I am, and you know, I think that that could be my purpose in life, is to try to help people that don't see things that way, and I can relate to various different groups in a whole nother way than a lot of people. It made me stronger, you know, it's unfortunate, but I think it's inevitable. You know, I think if we were all the same color, humans would still find something to, you know, have problems with each other. We're competitive. It's, you know, it's natural. But that's why we were given intellect. You know, we give an intellect, and if it's used improperly, we can talk ourselves into craziness. You know, but if it's used properly and we try to, you know, remain healthy with the intellect, we can use it to overcome a lot of those negative things. You know. I remember, just a quick story, give you an example of what you're talking about. For instance, I remember the first time that I went to my father's country in Senegal, and I came back, and I was so happy. We were on the playground playing basketball. I used to love to play sports. And I would share things in classes, or my dad might come in every now and then and talk about Senegal or Islam and stuff. And I remember a kid came to me, and he said, oh, I was beating him in basketball. He said, oh, you black African Chewy. I'm like, I never even heard this term, but he was just, I knew, you know, he was trying to be racist, you know. And that was an example, and, you know, we definitely got into a fight, and I definitely let him know he probably shouldn't do that anymore. He didn't do that anymore. He was my friend afterwards. You know, but luckily, though, it only was that, you know. It could be a lot worse. And, but one thing that my parents always did, though, is they made sure not to just come at the child. It's the parents. Children don't just learn these things. Children come out, like you said, loving each other. These things are taught. So my parents would not accept, oh, the kid gets detention or suspension, and oh yeah, we told the parents. No, bring the parents here. We're gonna talk together, all of us. We're gonna talk. And I think those, you know, those type of things are major. And it really taught me a lot too, to how to stand up for myself, how to speak up when something's not right, and to know justice, and to be, you know, proud of myself, and, you know, all those kind of things. But not everybody has that. I was blessed, you know, with parents that know, were proactive with those type of things, and knew how to handle it. And, you know, also me being a male and being strong and all of that, a bigger guy, you know, I wasn't as afraid of people maybe picking on me. But some people, I can absolutely understand that could be terrible, you know. And so anyway, yeah, that's it.
I have a story. I remember me being in 6th grade. I had a close friend. Her name was Blanche. She's Liberian. And she had a new friend. And she was talking about how her new friend was lesbian. I didn't know what lesbian was at all, because in my household, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about sex. Our parents just don't. We don't discuss stuff like that. So I was just confused. I'm like, what's that? And she's like, oh, she likes girls. I'm like, oh, so she likes me. Like, I automatically assumed, I'm like, oh my God, like, I have to get away from this person. And I remember if my friend brought her around, like, I wouldn't talk to the girl, or I just wouldn't be around her, because I just felt uncomfortable. But I also didn't know what it was. And I couldn't really go back home and ask, because it's like I would get in trouble probably for asking. And like, I knew, like, stuff that wasn't discussed, like, we just don't talk about it at home. And I remember asking one of my teachers that I was really close to, and she told me, and I was just like, I still wasn't comfortable. I couldn't grasp, like, why is this person like this? Like, I didn't understand. Like, I didn't view her as, oh my God, this is another human being. I viewed her as like, oh my God, I have to stay away from this person because they're different. And I would have to say I didn't get enough educated about it until 7th grade. 7th grade, I was more open-minded, and I actually ended up having friends that identified as gay, lesbian. I have 2 friends that are transgenders, now I'm an ally and everything, but it took me a long time to get educated to understand what it was like to deal with that. And also, I think I remember talking to the girl, and like she tried her best to like make me understand, but I just, like, in my world it didn't exist. Like, I didn't know about it. You know, on television, PG-13, like if on Disney Channel, if like a couple was about to kiss, my mom would change the channel. Like, that's just how I grew up. So I didn't know any of that existed. I didn't know many things that existed. Like, I didn't even know about some things about sex until high school. Like, we just, in my household, it wasn't addressed. I wasn't aware. I didn't even know how people got pregnant until like later in life, which was sad. But I remember that conversation, and every single time I think back to that girl, and now sometimes in some situations I am that girl due to my race, my religion, and I think back to like, okay, I wouldn't want people treating me like that, and how could I change that? And it's just dialogue, really, because I remember talking to her. I was cordial, I was civil with her. I was just like, I just didn't want to be your best friend kind of thing. And I remember she wanted to like be close friends because she thought, you know, African culture was amazing and everything. I'm just like, no, in my culture, I just can't be around you. But that's when you said that story, that's like why I think back to.
Other questions? Here?
I'm going to keep the trend going of telling a story before asking a question. I was at Peters Honda once, and when every workplace I go to, every school I go to, I'm really big on, or I just recently developed the habit of praying while I'm in a workplace. While I was in elementary school, it's like, you know, I can't pray Dhuhr, which is the afternoon time prayer, because I'm in school and it's a public environment. There are Muslims here. But recently, after 18, I started doing that. Every workplace I'm allowed to pray. They give me a place to pray. In school, and I was at Peters Honda doing my first car service, and it was like Asr time, and I was just thinking, you know, what if I just tried to, I didn't think it would happen. I was like, what if I just try to ask like someone if there's like a place to pray? I asked a lady at the desk, and she gave me a room to pray in. Not only that, but she made it private. She locked the door for me, and I was just astonished. And it hit me in that time and all these times that I'm allowed to pray, no matter where I am, no matter how, even if the person's like a rude person, like my manager or whatever, they respect the constitutional right that's protecting me, and they allow me to pray in some place. So what I'm getting at is when the lady at the end there, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, Rashida, when you tell me a story about the fact that someone keeps checking your bag, or someone doesn't even respect you for your job title because of how you look, it's not like, oh, that's really like unfortunate. Like, I can't even process that. And what I'm getting at is that among Muslims too, there are Muslims who really cannot say that I am targeted, I suffer, I'm profiled as much as other Muslims. I criticize, no Pakistanis in the room, are there? I criticize Pakistan. I criticize Pakistanis, I criticize a lot of Muslims a lot because there's a weird backfire in this, really nice progressive culture we have, that we like to have the habit of saying that, oh yeah, I'm Muslim, it's tough for me, I feel targeted. It really took me a while to develop the guts to say that I am so constitutionally protected in this country, and I just haven't felt these horrible things that other Muslims go through, maybe because of their skin tone. I feel that like having those guts to say that I'm not a part of this, the people being targeted is a part of the solution. And I just want to ask, like, how does it make you guys feel what do you guys think about that? Heavy question, I'm sorry.
Can you explain to me, like, what's...
So, do you think it's important that Muslims who aren't maybe targeted as much accept and really be realistic with the fact that it's not me, and just because I have the name Muslim, maybe I should kind of actually analyze my life and think how many times have I felt ostracized or targeted, instead of going with what a lot of Muslims say, and like there are a lot of issues and problems because of 9/11 and the things that we go through, but not all Muslims go through the same things. Like
Absolutely, and when I got the job with the police department, the Muslim community objected to having me at the police department, and they went to the chief, and they said that because what I will be doing, working with domestic violence or working with victims of sexual assault, and in their community, they deal with that by themselves, and they don't get the police involved. And I, because I came from the YWCA, and I had the name that, I work with victims of domestic violence, and there is victims of domestic violence in the Muslim community, a lot of them, and I did my best to help them. However, it's for them it's not I'm doing my job and I'm helping, I'm breaking families. So it is everywhere, and I'm not quiet, and I don't be quiet about, that's all we treated bad or all we treated good, but there is definitely benefits. Me sitting here and talking about it, that's a benefit of it, of being Muslim in America. But there is Muslims. I remember when one of the students here at the school, and he was driving, I think, with either expired driver license or non-licensed at all, and he came to the court, and I was helping him just translating and do things. And after I finished, he said to me, "You did good, but if you covered your hair, you will be better." And I was like, "Screw you, it's it's none of your business, you don't have to tell me, how I could be better, I'm good." And that just you say that, but for him, noticing that, because I give him my business card, and he saw, Muhammad and Rashid is his name. And I talked to him in Arabic, and he looked, and he's like, "Yeah, you're Muslim." We're like, "Yeah." And he said, "But if you only just put the scarf in your hair, like, come on, what that has to do with me helping you and say just thank you?" So there is those people that's, they are Muslims, and they still wanted to control or they bring their religion or their view on other Muslims here. I think did I answer your question?
I have two stories that relate to that. As some of you know, I write a column that's published in some local newspapers. And every once in a while, I'll get a call from this friend of mine who's a Palestinian American now. And he'll say, "Azzi, Mabruk, congratulations, what a great column you've written." And I'd say, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm getting so much grief from these people that write this nonsense. Why don't you write a letter to the editor and tell him how much you like my writing or this particular column?" He said, "Azzi, nobody knows I'm a Muslim, and I'm afraid that I'll lose business, if they find out." So I haven't outed him yet, but but he's a hunter, and if he doesn't give me a good piece of venison, who knows? But the other one was really a little bit more interesting. So I got an email from a guy who, I have to tell you, my email is theother.azzi@gmail.com. And so I get asked, "Why are you theother.azzi?" And it's because when I started writing my column, people who hated my column couldn't find me. So they were calling and writing to my brother. Really terrible messages. So I had to let them know that I'm the other Azzi and that they could write to me. So one guy wrote to me, and we ended up on the phone, and he said, "Oh, thank you for calling." He said, "I've got a problem. I've just hired 4 Syrian refugees." And I said, "Great, congratulations." I said, "Are they good workers?" He said, "Oh, they're terrific workers." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, they want to pray." And I said, "They want to pray?" And he said, "Yeah, they want to pray twice. They want to pray at lunchtime, and they want to pray in the afternoon." And I said, "So are you a 24/7 operation?" He said, "No, we're like 7 to 5 or something like that." And I said, "So what's the problem? They can pray on their lunchtime, and they get a break in the afternoon, and it can be a little bit flexible for the time." And he said, "But nobody else asks for permission to pray." And the absurdity struck me. I said, "Tell me, what calendar do you work on? What days off do you get? You get Saturday and you get all day Sunday off to pray." He said, "You're right." I said, "And you get Christmas off, and you get Easter off." And he said, "You're right." I said, "Just let them pray and see what happens." And he called me back about a month later. He said, "I've hired 2 more Syrians, and they're great workers, and they're praying, and they're really happy, and thank you very much. But sometimes it just takes getting in somebody's face a little bit and just calling them out on an absurdity that they just have not recognized themselves. They're not malevolent. That's the one thing I've found out in talking to people. Our neighbors aren't malevolent, and they're not mean by nature. You know, that these prejudices come from a dark place, or a place where they just haven't been exposed to a sort of a broad interest, like a university community, where you run into everybody. And when you run into everybody, you realize that we have so much more in common than we have that keeps us separate.
I would use the example of, for instance, with Colin Kaepernick right now. I mean, we can look at basically any group that's going under oppression. I think that it's very rare that everybody's going through the same. But just like we would expect any human, any race or whatever, to have compassion, you know, I still, you know, expect that. But that's all I would expect, you know. But I think it is good the way that you said it, for instance, with complete respect and also compassion and understanding that just because you personally might not have gone through it doesn't mean that people aren't. It doesn't mean it's not real. With the Colin Kaepernick thing, you know, the rapper Lil Wayne, right? Somebody asked him recently, I think, about what he thinks about it, and you know, what does he think about racism and things like that. And he said, "Hey, man, as far as I know, racism is dead." He's like, "Man, I got a lot of white friends." He said, "When I have my concerts, it's filled with white people. I've never had an incident like that." And he got some incredible, you know, backlash from the black community and outside, because he didn't have the compassion and the understanding that just because you, Lil Wayne, celebrity, rich, literally been a celebrity since 13, can't identify anymore, doesn't mean it's not going on, you know. So I just think that that's like just the most important part. I think it is important, and you know, it's also important that everybody understands that there's different experiences for everybody. It's just like, or with the issues with rape, for instance. You know, we may not, just because we didn't go through it doesn't mean we don't know or can't have compassion and, you know, for people. So that's it.
I totally agree. I feel like at the end of the day, we are humans and we should empathize with people. Just because we don't go through certain situations ourselves doesn't mean we can't support someone for going through something terrible in their life and uplift each other. So I think people, it's important to focus on supporting each other and uplifting. You don't have to agree with every situation, but you also do have to see that person as a human being and also just be there, because like I know in my community, in the Somali community, I know a lot of, like from what I've seen, a lot of females stay in really terrible domestic violence situation because divorce isn't a thing. Like they don't want to get divorced, and it's just like how you were raised. Like, you know, divorce is a terrible thing. And I just remember one of my friends, she's Muslim, and her parents were going through it, and I was just told her mom, I'm like, just leave. Like, I'm like, this guy is insane, just leave. And her daughter didn't have the balls to say, you know, Mom, like, Dad, one of these days, you know, you might be gone. And I just talked to her mother. I'm like, it's not worth it, just leave. And as a child, I felt like, oh my God, like I shouldn't say this. But also at the end of the day, like, I just couldn't watch that or see that. And her children were just like silent about it. And I'm like, no. Like, your mom is going to be gone one of these days, and you're just going to watch this happen, or like just hide in your room because it's happened. I'm like, no. Like, say something, do something about it. But I think just because I didn't have to go through it, but when something happens, I think it's important to speak up.
And it's time for us to close. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. One of the things that I'm leaving with myself, and the question that I would ask for myself that I want to look at, is that we live in a country where the tenets is freedom of religion for all, you know, and that we're welcoming to all. And your story about having to not wear the hijab because you wanted to fit in, and all the gyrations that people who worship in differently, what we do or what they do, or different ways we try to belong and to assimilate into a culture is a journey. And for the parents who are trying to maintain a culture, that's another journey too. And letting go as parents to create this new thing that's American culture, that's different from everything else, is a journey. So me being an immigrant too, I recognize a lot of the ways that we go about trying to belong and to fit in. So I just want you all to think about that as we leave. You know, what does it mean to be in a country where freedom is one of our main tenets? But we have to change who we are intrinsically in order to survive in this culture. So that is my closing note, and there's still more refreshments up there. Please take them all. We won't take them home. Sure, sure.
As an Arab male, probably the oldest man in this room, I'm sort of using the droit de seigneur to be able to get the last word in here. But it occurs to me as I'm listening to my friends and to Jerry's closing here, what we're dealing with isn't a Muslim problem or a Jewish problem or a black problem. This is a white American problem. It's a white American problem of white America being so institutionalized that they have to get over themselves and open the doors so that every step that every other community is making isn't a struggle and a conflict. And it's not something that has to be refought by every child who goes to school on the first day and has to explain what they have and why they're doing it and what prayer means or not means. We're minorities. We get along with each other pretty well. I'm engaged in a lot of interfaith work. But the barrier that I have is the institutionalized concept of a white, privileged, dare I say, Christian America that just needs to open its doors more to the promise of what America is.